Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Hugh McKay and I'm president of the Board of Directors of the City Club. Each year the City Club is pleased to present these high school debate championships, which along with our regular high school student program and youth forum series are part of our significant and continuing commitment to the youth of our community. We're proud of these remarkable young people and delighted to have this program to give a full forum treatment with radio and television broadcasts so our broadcast audience can share in the celebration of these students' great intellect and talent. We're especially pleased to have the continuing support of the law firm of Baker Hostetler for this program, along with many others. And I'd like to ask John Parker to the podium to just say a few words of welcome. John?
Thank you, Hugh. It's indeed an honor and a privilege for me on behalf of Baker and Hostetler to welcome all of you to the 2012 High School Debate Championship sponsored by Baker and Hostetler in memory of our late partner, Pat Jordan. As I was walking over today to the debate, I ran into a number of fans who are in town for the Mid-American Conference basketball tournament. For them, March Madness is beginning. For me, as a former high school debater, the pinnacle of March Madness is today at the High School Debate Championship. It's an honor for us at Baker and Hostetler to sponsor this debate in memory of our late partner, Pat Jordan. Pat was an outstanding trial lawyer and an accomplished high school debater. And Pat possessed a lot of the qualities that we believe debate helps foster in our young children, in our youngsters, not so young, but in our high schoolers, including analysis, logic, and self-confidence. And it's a real honor to have with us today a number of members of Pat's family, including his wife Sharon, his mother Nora, his brother Tom, and his sister Maggie. Unlike the debates that happen in my house with my children, today's debate will feature both logic and rules. And here to explain the rules of today's debate is Abby Davis from Magnificat High School. Thank you, Abby.
Thank you. On behalf of the Cleveland debate community, I would like to thank the City Club for its continuing commitment to supporting high school debate. The City Club has hosted and sponsored the championship debate, first in policy debate, and now in Lincoln Douglas debate, for over 25 years. I would also like to express our gratitude to the law firm of Baker and Hostetler, which has sponsored this championship for the past 15 years in memory of partner Patrick J. Jordan, a highly regarded and successful trial lawyer who died in 1995. Mr. Jordan was a championship policy debater at St. Ignatius High School, and his colleagues at Baker Hostetler have chosen to support this forum in order to celebrate his commitment to debate and to recognize students who demonstrate the same talent, passion, and drive for which he was known. We are sincerely grateful to everyone at the law firm of Baker and Hostetler for providing so much support and visibility to debate, an activity that has enriched the high school careers of hundreds of students throughout the Cleveland area. There are 3 judges for this debate. Mr. Richard Kowalik began the speech and debate program at Laurel School 8 years ago. Not only is he the head of the speech department and the forensics coach, he teaches chemistry, AP chemistry, and physics. Mrs. Ann Farah has been coaching and judging forensics since 2001 at Rocky River High School, where her son Ben and daughter Mary both competed in speech and debate. Mrs. Farah plays 3.5 level women's tennis and is a member of the state championship team. She is a neonatal nurse practitioner group coordinator at Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospital. Mr. George Yanaga has judged Lincoln Douglas debate for the past 10 years, since his son Dan was a debater at Berea High School, and he has also coached me through my 4 years at Magnificat. Mr. Yanaga is also a dedicated coach for the pitchers on the Berea High School baseball team. He currently works as a manager of packaging operations at the Cleveland UPS facility. The timekeeper for this debate is Lisa Peng, a sophomore from Laurel School, and the commentator is Nathan Purbum, a senior from St. Ignatius. This year's debaters are, on the affirmative, Victor Mezacapa, a sophomore from University School, coached by Mr. Peter Paik and Mr. James Lewis. And on the negative, Anirudh Dasarathy, a senior from Hawkins School, coached by Mr. Robert Schertz. The debate you are about to hear is a Lincoln Douglas debate. This style of debate requires debaters to evaluate current political and social issues in light of philosophical principles. Lincoln Douglas resolutions question the justice or moral permissibility of certain policies, not simply the pros and cons. Each debater proposes a value and a value criterion, which establish how the debate ought to be evaluated. After each debater presents his case, his opponent has the opportunity to cross-examine him. And the debaters each have a chance to refute each other's arguments. The affirmative debater has the advantage of speaking first and last, and the negative debater has the advantage of having longer speeches. The resolution for this debate will be resolved. Targeted killing is a morally permissible foreign policy tool. Now, if the debaters and judges are ready, we may begin the debate.
So before I officially begin, I would like to thank a few people who helped get me where I am before you today. I would like to thank the City Club for promoting the freedom of speech. Likewise, I would like to thank my headmaster, Mr. Murray, and the School of US for supporting our strong debate program. I would also like to thank my coaches, Peter Paik and Mr. Lewis, for helping me grasp the concept of debate. Also, Mr. William Henry, U.S. Class of 2000, for his help in the past few weeks. I would like to thank my debate captain, Prasanth Srinivasan, for his leadership and dedication for the team and his help in my understanding of debate. I would also like to thank my friend and fellow debater, Gabe Kaufman, to whom I technically owe my debate career. And most importantly, I would like to thank my parents for their support and investment in all I do. So, with all that completed, we can begin. I affirm the resolution. Resolved, targeted killing is morally permissible as a foreign policy tool. To clarify the round, I offer the following definition. Thomas B. Hunter, expert on military affairs, defines targeted killing as the premeditated, preemptive, and intentional killing of an individual or individuals known or believed to present and or represent a future threat to the safety and security of a state through affiliation with terrorist groups or individuals. The value for the round then is societal welfare. Societal welfare is paramount for two reasons. First, the resolution asks us to judge targeted killing as a tool. Therefore, we need to assess not only the tool itself, but also the effects of the tool when applied. Second, the resolution asks a question about the issue of government policy, which is made with the primary objective of promoting the welfare of a nation's citizens. The value criterion for the round will be the preservation of national security. First, because national security is a prerequisite to societal welfare, and second, because in serving the societal welfare, the government and military serve first and foremost to protect their people. Before any further argumentation, I would like to offer an observation to help frame the round. Because the resolution calls for targeted killing to be permissible as a foreign policy tool, I argue not that targeted killing is always desirable, or that it will be the default foreign policy setting for states to pursue their objectives. I argue only that in general, the rules of moral conduct for states allow selective use, not abuse, of targeted killing as a tool. My first contention is that targeted killing is a morally permissible response to a threat to state. All schools of thought, from ancient Chinese to Greek to Roman to European Enlightenment social contract thinkers, agree on the purpose of the state. Governments are established to protect the people, who only give up certain freedoms in exchange for that protection. The responsibility for the government to protect would be meaningless if the government had no tools to enact that responsibility. That's why everyone in this room pays taxes, so the government can effectively use those taxes to build effective means to use the threat of force to protect us. Therefore, it follows that the government must be able to use force to fulfill its moral obligation to its citizens. And it is in that vein that targeted killing represents a proportional response to terrorist threats. This is for a simple reason. It is impossible to defend against terrorists. Yaakov Katz writes in the Jerusalem Post, quote, "For Israel, this is primarily a derivative of the nature of the conflicts it currently faces. Terror and guerrilla groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, and Islamic Jihad usually lack a clear power base, the elimination of which could deal a heavy blow to the organization. This is in contrast to a nation-state, which has clear core targets such as military bases, government institutions, and critical state infrastructure. As such, it is natural that Western militaries like Israel and the U.S. search for alternatives like targeted killings, end quote. Because targeted killing is a form of anticipatory self-defense, the government is morally permitted to use this tool to free its people from threats to state, because it has a moral obligation to protect its citizenry, and particularly offensive attacks like terrorism merit a counteroffensive response. My second contention is that targeted killing is a uniquely effective tool for combating terrorism. Part of the uniqueness and efficacy of targeted killing comes from its ability to prevent threats to national security. For instance, in Israel, officials are able to use targeted killing to prevent an estimated 80% of suicide bombings. This prevention tactic is specific to targeted killing because no other method can eliminate specifically bombers or specifically bomb makers. The ability of targeted killing to target those persons with special information who are difficult for the organization to replace also serves to hamper the ability of combatants to operate efficiently and effectively in pursuing their specialized tactics. By targeting leaders of terrorist groups, those organizations are kept from being successful in their fighting. Specifically, Stephen David of Johns Hopkins University validates the claim that key leaders are, in fact, impossible to replace. Stephen says that in terrorist organizations, quote, leadership, planning, and tactical skills are confined to a few individuals, end quote. When one or more of those individuals are targeted, the organization suffers. Those groups are then severely incapacitated and will not be able to as effectively carry out terrorism. Finally, according to David, targeted killing can be an effective deterrent against even extremist terrorists. He appropriately points out that not everyone in a terrorist group is a suicide bomber. Scientists, bomb makers, leaders, and other members of terrorist groups would be deterred because they are not necessarily prepared to die for their cause. They will either be deterred completely from their terrorist activity or, at least, will be forced to spend their time and energy avoiding targeted killing rather than carrying out acts of terrorism. In fact, according to Philip Heyman of Harvard Law School, the U.S. has used targeted killing in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Yemen to kill numerous high-ranking members of al-Qaeda and the Taliban. Targeted killing is actually increasing in its role in the war on terror. According to Heyman, regarding targeted killing operations, quote, there were more such strikes in the first year of Obama's administration than in the last 3 years of the Bush administration, end quote. Without targeted killing, governments could not pursue a foreign policy objective such as the war on terror. Let's be clear that the affirmative position today is that targeted killing is one of many foreign policy tools that should exist. In certain situations, targeted killing is the only policy that will be a viable option for the government in order to preserve national security and, in that way, preserve societal welfare. Thus, I affirm.
All right, so is everyone ready for a cross-examination? You start. Okay. So, what is the position of Thomas Hunter, who defines targeted killing?
Thomas Hunter basically is just presenting a bunch of evidence about targeted killing.
What's his position?
What do you mean by his position?
Like, what specifically is his position?
What we should do about targeted
position,
killing? I'm sure his position is that targeted killing is a valuable tool.
I mean, in what capacity, not what position he has on the topic, brother. In what capacity does he serve?
He serves, in my case, to define what we're actually talking about.
I'm talking about what capacity he serves in, like, a larger institution. Like, what institution does he work for example?
Oh, his qualifications.
Yes.
He's basically, he's a writer. So he of course, he moves around, but
okay,
I'm just using his...
Okay, if I present you another definition, which is from someone who is active in the field, would you prefer that?
I would have to look at the definition.
Okay. Looking towards your value of societal welfare, why do we look at this? Why is any action that acts in favor of societal welfare automatically morally permissible?
Well, when I'm saying that we have to narrow the resolution, we have to narrow our analysis to the context of the resolution. So in this context, when we're looking at foreign policy tools, of course foreign policy tools are meant to preserve
we're evaluating the morality of those foreign policy tools. Right. Though. Why is it that any foreign policy tool that advances like social agendas, why does that automatically make them morally permissible?
Well, because the government has an obligation to protect its citizens. Okay. That's a moral obligation.
Sure. Does it have an obligation to not harm other citizens?
I'm sure it should observe, like, I'm not saying that it should ignore all citizens around the world, but its primary obligation is within its
Even
own
if that's
nation.
true, though, does that mean a government still has obligations to other people outside of its immediate country? For example, is it moral for the U.S. to commit mass murders of non-U.S. citizens?
I would say no.
Okay, so at that point, the U.S. still has obligations to people who are not necessarily U.S. citizens, correct?
As long as you make that distinction, that they're a different kind of obligation, then I'm okay with.
Sure. But we still have obligations. It is still not morally right to say mass murder other people, right, who are not in our own country. So we still have some level of obligation to that,
I mean,
correct?
this isn't a debate about the U.S. going out and mass murdering people.
Sure,
We're
I'm just
trying to
saying-
weigh whether
okay.
targeted killing itself is.
So what can be done in the name of national security?
Well, when we're looking at foreign policy tools, we're looking to preserve the national security first.
Sure. But can we do anything in the
But-
name of national
yeah,
security?
And on that point, we should restrict ourselves in what we do, because if we act
Okay.
in a way that is not beneficial to, say, the global political sphere, so if we
Sure.
went and mass murdered a bunch of Pakistani citizens, that would not be good for the general stability, and it
sure.
actually wouldn't serve
Okay.
to make us safer.
If I broke into your house, is it morally permissible for you to kill me and kill my neighbor?
Well, if you're threatening me...
If I were
of
threatening
course.
you, could you kill me and my neighbor who's sitting at home and watching TV and has not done anything wrong?
Oh, I wouldn't kill him. Just...
It would be, I know you would kill him. Is it morally right to kill him, though?
Oh, no, it would
Okay,
be
so-
defensible if I killed you, just not him.
Okay, so it's still morally wrong to kill my neighbor who's watching TV.
Well, of course, if
they
to
didn't-
a certain extent, you have to be careful with that kind of analysis. Because it's like, if I shoot you and my bullet goes through the window into him, then I can't really be blamed for that.
Okay.
But
I'll take prep time, please. Starting prep now.
Nathan, thanks for joining me. Can you hear me? Ready? Okay. During their prep time, we're going to have a little bit of a discussion about what the debaters are going through during their prep time and talk about the Lincoln debate style. My name is Michelle Canoe, and I am a reporter with WCPN, and I'm here with Nathan.
Good afternoon.
Nathan, tell me, what is the prep time for?
So during Victor's last speech, Ani was taking notes on what debaters call the flow. So during his prep time, he's going to look through his notes and construct rebuttal arguments. So during the next speech, you should look for two things. The first thing you should look for is for Ani to construct his own case with a value criterion, and contentions. The second part of his speech will consist of what he is preparing right now, that is, the responses to what Victor has offered as his key arguments.
You know, one question I have is I noticed as Ani was presenting his cross-examination time that the two didn't make any eye contact. Is that typical?
That's very typical. During cross-examination, because it is ultimately not a personal argument between the two debaters, the discussion is completely directed at the judge. And that's just one of the decorums and conventions of the style of debate.
And during that prep time, is there a particular strategy that Ani may be developing?
Well, during cross-examination, there is a strategy. I don't know exactly what Ani's strategy is during prep time, but during cross-ex, Ani will try and do two things. The first thing that he'll try and do is clarify any of the arguments he didn't flow right or didn't take notes on correctly or missed. And the second part of his cross-examination will be setting up arguments for his next speech. And a skilled cross-examiner will make those two kinds of questions, that is, clarification questions and premise-setting questions, indistinguishable.
What amount of time have both of our debaters spent preparing for this style of debate?
Well, the topic for Lincoln Douglas changes every 2 months. And a month before a topic is first debated, the National Forensic League announces the topic. And from that point, debaters all over the country begin intense research, hours and hours of reading law journals, Supreme Court cases, philosophy papers, and really the time investment is hard to quantify because there's so much of it, and there are a lot of intangible investments in terms of conversations you have with your coach, conversations you have with other debaters that really contribute to being prepared for the activity.
And what might the team be thinking about while their debater is up on stage?
I could not tell you. I'm sure that both teams are very proud of both of their debaters. Both Ani and Victor are doing a fantastic job thus far, and they're very skilled. So I'm sure that they'll give us a fantastic debate for this afternoon.
And you mentioned both of our debaters are very skilled today. Tell me, what kind of skill actually does it take to be up there?
Well, it takes a tremendous amount of talent and hard work. I know both Victor and Ani have been preparing for this topic for the last month and a half or so, and clearly they're well-read and they know how to handle a lot of very sophisticated logic and argumentation on the spot without any kind of pre-written responses.
And is there an academic background that may help them out as well?
I don't know exactly what the academic background of both the debaters is. Both of the debaters are, but I'm sure that they excel in all the school-related activities they do.
Sure, but does one need to have a background in
No,
history?
it's not
or...
necessary. I know that both of them are very involved in science, for example. Both of them do science research, so it doesn't select out people who are just English students.
Okay. Do we have more time?
No.
All right, so is everyone ready for the negative constructive? All right, Dan, before I start, I would like to thank the City Club of Cleveland for hosting us today and for promoting free speech. I would like to thank my coach, Mr. Bob Schurz, and the rest of my debate team, as well as the rest of the people who have helped me throughout my Hawken High School career. It has been an honor working with all of you. Finally, I would like to thank my parents, without whose constant support and encouragement, I would not be here. So, I guess we can I'll begin now. I negate the resolution that targeted killing is not a morally permissible foreign policy tool. I value morality, since the resolution asks us to evaluate whether or not an action is allowed under a moral framework. No action that ever involves sacrificing an innocent individual is morally permissible. Thus, the value criterion is protecting innocence for two reasons. First, if we ever allow an innocent to be sacrificed when taking an action, we devalue human worth and life from an uncompromisable commodity to one that can be taken away. Second, sacrificing an innocent who has not done anything wrong uses them as a means to an end, which is fundamentally immoral. Using people as a means to an end violates the intrinsic value of each human. I contend that targeted killing does not protect the rights of innocents, both short and long term. Subpoint A. Targeted killing often results in innocent casualties. Even with the intent of only killing a few guilty people, targeted killings often kill innocent bystanders. Yael Stein finds that about a third of the people killed in the course of Israeli targeted killings have been innocent bystanders. Increasingly, targeted killing has been carried out using drone attacks, which my opponent mentions, which cause area damage and kill even more innocents. Studies show that of Israeli targeted killings between 2000 and 2011, 40.9% killed were innocent bystanders. This is sadly one of the best-case scenarios. According to the U.S. think tank Brookings Institution, in U.S. targeted killings operations, more than 600 civilians are likely to have died from the attacks. For every militant killed, 10 or more civilians die. Subpoint B. When targeted killing does succeed, it creates a martyrdom effect, propelling more resistant leaders to power who harm innocents. According to Gabriella Blum of Harvard University, an immediate consequence will be the Hydra effect, the rise of more and more resolute leaders to replace them. This only harms more innocents in the long term, especially since these new cells have become increasingly harder to capture. Blum furthers that the threat of being targeted will drive current leaders into hiding, making the monitoring of their activities more difficult. Thus, targeted killing only results in the rise of stronger, larger, more difficult to track terrorist operatives, putting more innocents at risk than lives saved. Subpoint C. Targeted killings provoke retaliation, leading to empirically observed higher attacks. Logically, if one country provokes an organization by using targeted killings, the organization has an incentive to retaliate, often harming innocents through further action. According to political scientist Michael Gross, there is growing evidence that named killings only increase the incidence of terror bombings. Matthew A. Morehouse of the University of Nebraska finds that using multivariate regression analysis, comparing retaliation to possible reduction of terrorist activity, that on balance, for every 1 unit increase in targeted killings per week, there is an increase of over 5 terrorist attacks and 8 more fatalities just the following week. Overall, there is an almost 10-fold increase in the number of fatalities from terrorist attacks when using targeted killing. Thus, even in the long term, targeted killing leads to a 10-fold increase in innocent casualties. Subpoint D. Whenever we consider a foreign policy action, we ask two questions. Martha Nussbaum argues. In all situations of choice, we face the obvious question, what shall we do? But we also face, or should face, a different question, the tragic question. Is any alternative free from moral wrongdoing? As Nussbaum suggests, we must recognize the distinction between an action being required for a state and morally endorsing that action. Even if all other alternatives fail, the least of all evils is still fundamentally evil. Now let's look at some of the points my opponent brought up in his first speech. Looking towards the value of societal welfare. First, all values inherently flow towards morality. Societal welfare derives its power from the general will of the people. At that point, the general will is consistent with morality, so you look at the value of morality. Second, there are limits to what countries can do in the name of societal welfare. Just because a country acts in the name of societal welfare doesn't automatically make their actions morally permissible. For example, there are numerous instances throughout history where countries have acted in the name of societal welfare and have done moral atrocities. Third, the right to life is pre-political. It functions at a level higher than societal welfare. At that point, you always look at the right to life of innocent individuals who will be killed, both short and long term, prior to societal welfare. Looking towards the criteria of preservation of national security, first, just because a country is secure does not mean that they are acting in a morally permissible fashion. For example, Soviet Russia was a secure state, yet their actions weren't always morally right. They killed their own citizens. Second, you can turn this argument on its head. If you look at just national security, you often justify horrible things. National security should be a byproduct of higher moral values. Third, even if you have a primary obligation to your own people, there would still be a backlash effect if you went and harmed other individuals. At that point, it is in a country's self-interest to not harm innocents. Looking towards the observation that targeted killing is permissible as a tool, once again, I'm saying the tool is always immoral, so it doesn't matter. Looking towards his first contention, he says it's an act of self-defense. First, any condition of self-defense would require some form of imminency. However, countries are the ones who decide who the terrorists are. According to Daniel Byman, Cuba, for example, could define exiles living in Miami as terrorists. At that point, you shouldn't leave it up to an arbitrary country's decision to decide who to kill. He says a government must protect its people, but once again, there are limits on what a government can do. At the point where A, you harm innocents, and B, you result in a tenfold increase in terrorist fatalities, it isn't a case of self-defense. He says it's impossible to defend a country without the use of targeted killings. But once again, he assumes that targeted killing is actually successful. Research in Afghanistan by Dr. David Usmani shows that 98.5% of people killed in targeted killings are actually innocents. According to the Middle East Policy Center, only one high-value target is killed for every 147 total deaths. At that point, targeted killing rarely actually kills the people who are responsible. Looking towards his second contention, where he argues that it's uniquely effective. First, the entire negative case turns this argument on its head. I'm showing you repeatedly with empirical data that it's not effective. He says you can target the key leaders, but the problem is that his Stephen David evidence later goes on to say that, quote, his evidence later goes on to say, quote, targeted killing has not been effective in stopping terrorism. He continues that a much stronger case can be made that targeted killings actually increase the number of Israelis killed by provoking retaliation. At that point, his evidence contradicts himself. Furthermore, the fact that key leaders can be targeted is empirically denied. Remember, we kill one high-value target for 147 total deaths. That means that his logic is being empirically denied. He says it acts as a deterrent. However, that's not true. According to Mohammed Hafez, who empirically studied targeted killing, expectations of deterrence have been rejected outright by his analysis. He finally goes on to say that targeted killing is legitimate because it works. Once again, it doesn't work because it harms innocents in the process. Furthermore, if you look long-term, it harms innocents. Furthermore, even if you don't buy any of this, remember, cells are often unique. Just because you take out one specific cell doesn't mean that all the other cells will stop functioning. At that point, targeted killing harms innocents, doesn't work, so regardless of whichever value or value criterion you look at, it's not a morally permissible option.
Okay, judges ready? Okay, so starting at the top of your case, you say we need to look to harming innocents, right?
I say we should prevent harm to innocents.
Right, so we prevent harm to innocents.
Yes.
So at what point does the government say, just because we're harming innocents, we can't do this action to defend ourselves?
So that's getting answered by my subpoint D, where I argue that just because an action is necessary for a government doesn't mean that the action is morally right. From a moral standpoint, the act is still wrong.
But we're just arguing about whether it's morally permissible, right?
Right. From a moral standpoint, it's immoral, so it's not morally permissible, even if a government has to take the action. It's still, from a moral standpoint, not permissible.
Okay, so it's immoral if it's not permissible, right?
Yes, immoral actions are not morally permissible.
The negative position is that it's immoral, correct?
I would argue it's immoral and not morally permissible.
So are you advocating that we do immoral actions?
No, I'm saying that my burden is not to say what we should do, but rather to illustrate from a moral standpoint that targeted killing is wrong.
Right, so if targeted killing is immoral and we can't do immoral actions, can we ever use targeted killing?
Okay, once again, in subpoint D, I established that there is a distinction between actions we should do and actions that are morally permissible. At that point, even if because we have no other options, we are forced to use targeted killings in a specific instance, it is still morally wrong, so you negate. We must recognize the fact that we are acting immorally.
But the negative advocacy cannot uphold targeted killing, correct? If it's immoral.
I would argue once again that just because it's once again, my burden is to show that it is immoral, not whether we should or should not use targeted killing. The arguments in the affirmative case and the negative case not only show that they're immoral, but also we shouldn't. But once again, my primary burden is to show that it's an immoral action, and that I'm doing through the contention and the framework.
Okay, so you use Morehouse evidence, right?
Yes.
Do you have that with you? Do you have the full article?
Okay, you're going to make the argument that later in the article he says that. No, that's not the argument. That's not the evidence. Well, this is the Morehouse study. So just to be clear, there are two Morehouse studies. So the part of the evidence you're going to be reading is going to be the logic section, but Morehouse even admits the hard facts go the other way.
Okay, so are we to look to hard facts or logic?
I would argue you look at what happens in the real world. At the point where in the real world, every time we increase the targeted killing by 1 unit, it leads to a 10-fold increase in casualties.
So it's automatic? So if I targeted kill someone, automatically 10 innocents just drop dead?
On balance, right? We should look on balance. On balance, targeted killing results in a 10-fold increase in casualties. If you want to give individual examples, that's fine in the next speech. When you say that I don't give individual examples, I'll give you numerous individual examples. We've had direct retaliation.
You just said that my observation was fine because you're arguing that the tool is always immoral?
I'm saying that the tool is fundamentally immoral, so that means that it's still morally wrong.
Okay. And then back to another
wrong.
question. Is the negative advocacy for pacifism?
No, my burden is to it's not a pacifist argument. My argument is that targeted killing should not be used.
Okay,
It's morally wrong.
so let me just ask you, I agree with you, this is extra-resolutional to a certain extent, but can wars be justified?
Once again, that is a completely different situation. There are
I just said I
ethical-
recognize that, but
Okay, once again, that's something that I can't give you a
just
simple yes or
asking
no answer.
just asking at you as like a human being, would you say that wars can be justified?
There are a large number of situations provided by ethical experts throughout history that outline just war theory, which gives certain conditions that must be met for war to be justified.
Okay.
Okay. Nathan, thanks for joining me once again. Now let's talk a little bit about some of the hallmarks of a Lincoln-Douglas debate. First of all, remind us where the concept of a Lincoln-Douglas style debate actually comes from.
So the idea of a Lincoln-Douglas debate came from, of course, the famous 1858 Lincoln-Douglas debate. And the purpose of a Lincoln-Douglas debate is to decide the moral accuracy of something called a resolution. In this case, we are talking about targeted killings. And you'll notice that both Victor and Ani are talking about the moral accuracy of the statement, not just whether the policy should be used. So that is a classic distinction between Lincoln-Douglas debate and, for instance, the debates that you will see during the presidential campaign.
Why don't we see more Lincoln-Douglas style debates in, say, presidential debates that we might see on TV?
Well, Lincoln-Douglas debates are not grounded in current events necessarily. This topic tends to use many examples from the Iraq War, the situation in Palestine, but a lot of the topics are purely philosophical. And so in the public sphere, most people are looking for actual solutions to the political or social problems that we're trying to deal with, not just whether something is morally incorrect or not.
And are there any contexts where the Lincoln-Douglas style debate might still be used today?
Well, I suppose that this is one example where Lincoln-Douglas debate is clearly allowing us to evaluate the foreign policy tools that we use on much more than just a purely logistical standpoint. So I would say that this kind of public forum is helping our political dialogue as a country.
And to stay within this style, are there any particular no-nos that the debaters must avoid today?
Well, that really depends on the judges. Some judges really want the debaters to treat each other very respectfully. Other judges are more open to a very confrontational style of debate. But technically, there are, besides of course, the requirement that people be honest and have integrity with the evidence they use, there's not a specific list of things that you're absolutely not allowed to do.
And what kind of resources might the debaters have up there with them during this prep time?
The debaters are going to have different things depending on how they prepared. They will have a printed constructive case, and they will also have what are called blocks, which are pieces of evidence that they have in anticipation of arguments that are made based on the literature they've read. Besides that, they've got note paper. Sometimes they'll have a computer for organizing notes. But other than that, it's just them and the evidence.
Okay, we have a little bit more time. So tell me what the debaters can do kind of the day before the debate, before they actually get here.
Get a lot of sleep. I don't think there's, I mean, the day before, it's hard to tell. Usually you try and just organize everything and be very confident in your arguments. But the heavy preparation is weeks and weeks in the making.
Okay. Are we ready?
So quickly before I begin, just to let everyone know where we're going to be sort of navigating. We're going to be starting with an analysis of the negative and then moving into defenses of the affirmative. Okay, so judges ready? Okay, starting at the top of my opponent's case, he says we need to use a value of morality, but he really gives no warrant for this. Morality isn't the only way we assess moral permissibility, because I've framed a different way to determine whether something's moral. He's not looking deep enough into the context of the resolution. So it's not often very good to take a broad perspective of the resolution because it's asking us a very specific question. And we need to be able to evaluate that question with the most detailed tools possible. That's what the value's for. So we're not looking just to be moral. We're looking to be moral when we're using this foreign policy tool. And since my opponent didn't respond to the basis I used for why I chose societal welfare, we can see that it still holds as the premier value for the round. But even then, looking at his value criterion of protecting the innocent, this is a bad value criterion because he tries to determine it as an absolute. He tries to say that as soon as we harm innocents, our actions have been immoral. But this seems to preclude any use of force by the state. And like I've discussed in my contentions and in my case, that no moral philosophy will ever say that a state cannot defend itself. You will never find a doctrine that advocates for, besides pacifism, of course, that advocates that the state never use force as coercion. So as for his two warrants, that we're using people as a means to an end, that's fundamentally untrue. But as for his warrant that we should never allow innocents to die, all foreign policy tools that we use, such as comparable alternatives to targeted killing, will have the risk of harming innocents. He has to prove that inherently targeted killing, by its very nature, kills more innocents. So as for his contention 1, subpoint A about collateral damage, well, he's talking about a bunch of statistics. But we can see this even in the Morehouse example. All of the writers you find write about benefits and bad effects of targeted killing. You'll never find an article that is completely one way or the other. So when he uses statistics, of course, he criticizes me from turning his own author against him, but then what we need to be looking to is qualitative analysis in the round, not quantitative. So when he says that 1/3 of innocents are killed in drone attacks in Israel, I don't even know how that's true because actually the Israeli army avoids innocent deaths in 70 to 75% of their targeted killings. So I don't know how that works out mathematically. But this is not an inherent problem with targeted killing. So as for his subpoint B of the martyrdom effect, now, he uses Bloom, Gabrielle Bloom. What she says is that we should also look to qualitative analysis because with quantitative analysis, what we're avoiding with targeted killing is terrorism. We're preventing threats and actions that haven't happened yet. So he's trying to measure something that's very clear against something that we don't know. So in other words, we could have prevented another 9/11 with targeted killing. He doesn't know. So it's very hard to measure the affirmative stance against the negative. So insofar as that is true, we have to look to inherent qualities of targeted killing. His subpoint C of provocation, he uses gross, but basically backlash is outweighed by the good effects. So yes, there's a possibility of backlash as there is with anything we do. And as for his subpoint D, it really doesn't reasonably make sense because what the negative is saying with this subpoint is that he realizes that you have to do something, but he's not going to let you. And I don't see how that works out just with sort of an appeal to reasonableness. But as for moving on to the affirmative case, again, I already said he didn't properly address why we use societal welfare. We need a narrow context for the round. Value criterion of national security. Again, we're looking to the warrant that a government has a primary obligation to its own citizens. And if you're going to say that it can never harm innocents, it can never take action. So the negative position is trying to take that government's obligation to defend itself away. And we can't do that because that's immoral. As for my observation, again, he didn't address the fact that we're not looking at isolated incidents of targeted killing. We're looking at what targeted killing actually is. So we need to look at the inherent nature, and that will cross-apply to all my contentions. Contention 1, he dropped the fact that no legitimate moral theory precludes self-defense that we're using anyway. Again, that there's no meaning to the government's obligation to defend its citizens if you take away the tools to do so. And he dropped the cat's card under that contention. And as for contention 2, the fact that it's a unique and effective tool still stands. So we need to look to the deterrent effect that war can't have. And we need to look to the fact that governments cannot pursue objectives like the war on terror if targeted killing is taken away. So all of those things still support the affirmative side of the resolution, and thus I still affirm.
Okay, Nathan, while our debaters have their next session of prep time, Now I want you to tell me a little bit about the competition. So what kind of stages have the debaters gone through prior to getting here today?
Well, the debate season begins during the fall, and every weekend there is a district tournament. So all the schools come together, and usually debaters have 4 rounds, and you debate twice on the negative and twice on the affirmative. In February, there is a state qualifying tournament and a national qualifying tournament. Ani and Victor were the 2 top debaters at this year's national qualifying tournament. So they will be representing the Cleveland North Coast District in Indianapolis this June during that national competition.
So the next step is a competition in June?
Yes, the next step is a competition in June. The state tournament was actually last weekend.
What type of prize is at stake here?
Well, I know that if you win nationals, there are scholarships, but other than that, it's really just a pursuit of bettering yourself and kind of developing a critical understanding of the world around you. There's not really a lot of concrete rewards beyond that.
And what about for the team itself? Is there anything that they get once?
Well, there are certainly Sweepstakes Awards. So at a given tournament, the team that wins the most rounds or wins the most in all the events will be awarded a Sweepstakes Award. And that's always a good thing to get.
Is it typical for students to spend... Oh, are you done? Sorry, let us know. Stop.
All right, is everyone ready for the negative rebuttal? Judges ready? Part ready? So I would like to point out that you shouldn't let my opponent make any new arguments in his next speech because I don't have an opportunity to respond to them. So let's looking towards the value and the value criterion debate. If we look towards the value of morality, he says first, I don't give you, we should look very specifically and we should take a detailed approach. The problem is I'm giving you a detailed approach through the value criterion. I'm saying that you evaluate moral permissibility of an action based on how it harms innocence. Therefore, I'm giving you the detailed approach in the case. He says there are other ways to frame morality. He gives you societal welfare, but he's completely conceding at least 4 arguments. There are 4 arguments in his value criterion. Those are 8 independent reasons that I'll go over once again when I go over my opponent's case. If we look towards my value criterion of protecting innocence, he says this absolute idea of protecting innocence is wrong. The problem is that he's completely misunderstanding my moral framework. I'm saying that although we may have to harm innocence at some point, it doesn't make the action morally right from a moral standpoint. Specifically, in subpoint D, I established that morality is purely descriptive. It tells us whether or not an action is wrong. We may be forced to take an action, but that doesn't automatically make it morally right. But even if you don't look at it from an absolute point of view, if you compare, I will show you throughout my case how comparatively I better uphold the rights of innocence. So even if morality shouldn't be absolute, on a comparative level, I'll be demonstrating how I better uphold innocence. He says that no moral philosophy will basically allow a state to not use self-defense. Once again, I made answers to that in the affirmative case. I'll get to that there. So at that point, you can look that A, if you don't protect innocence, you devalue human worth. And B, that sacrificing an innocent who has not done anything wrong uses them as a means to an end. At that point, you should always protect innocence. Then, looking towards the contention where I demonstrate how on multiple levels my opponent harms the rights of innocence. My first point was basically that targeted killing often results in innocent casualties. He says, once again, that's not inherent to targeted killing. However, according to Yalstein, quote, this is a natural consequence of having adopted targeted killing in the first place, end quote. So it's a direct and natural consequence due to a variety of factors that targeted killing will often harm innocence. He says we should look at qualitative data because quantitative data is uncertain and you can't measure the effectiveness of targeted killing. This specifically means you should negate because you should not endorse an action for which A, you cannot measure its efficacy, especially in the light of the fact that targeted killing often kills innocent civilians. You should not gamble moral lives for some sort of policy for which you can't even measure its efficacy. He says that in Israel's cases, they avoid 70 to 75% of innocent casualties. Once again, even if that's true in the case of Israel, he's completely conceding the fact that if you look at U.S. targeted killing operations, which he advocated in his case, for every 1 militant killed, 10 or more civilians die. At that point, innocent lives are clearly not being protected if we use targeted killings. But even if you don't look at that, if you look towards my second point, where targeted killings often result in more resolute leaders, he makes the argument once again that once again you can't look at quantitative data, that quantitative data is bad. But once again, A, there is very clear quantitative data on the topic. All of the authors provide multivariate regression studies that evaluate the use of targeted killings. They publish these in peer-reviewed journals, which seems to indicate that they are of some validity. But even if you look at just the qualitative data, once again,
Even Morehouse is one of the authors who gives some qualitative reasons, but admits that the hard facts flow the other way. The hard facts suggest that targeted killings provoke retaliation and harm innocents in the long run. Furthermore, you can look at the Blum evidence I gave that once again, that it often results in the rise of more resolute leaders. He once again tries to make the argument that quantitative data is bad, but once again, if it's truly bad, you should negate right there, because you should not gamble away human lives based on a policy which may or may not work. If you look towards my third point where we talked about retaliation, he says it's outweighed by the good effects, but it's not. My Morehouse study specifically took into account the good effects and found that the bad effects outweigh the good effects. My evidence takes into account his and turns it around. At that point, you can see that for every 1 unit increase of targeted killings, there is a 10-fold increase in the number of casualties that clearly suggests innocents are not being harmed. My fourth point was that there's a difference between an action being necessary and morally permissible. He once again says that just because you have to doesn't mean that. He once again makes this argument that it's contradictory because if an action is morally wrong, you can't take it. That's exactly the point I'm trying to make. That just because an action must be necessary doesn't make it morally right. If we now look towards my opponent's case, if we look towards the value of societal welfare, my opponent is completely not answering a lot of the responses I gave against his framework, so you can extend these now. First of all, there must be a limit of what governments can do in the name of societal welfare. For example, we can't just go on harm many innocents. The second argument was that society derives its power from the general will of the people. At the point where you harm the people, society's notion is denigrated. Looking towards his criterion of national security, he's completely conceding the fact that just because you uphold national security doesn't mean it's moral. I gave you the example of the USSR. The USSR was secure, but it committed moral atrocities by killing its own people. At that point, from a purely moral standpoint, national security doesn't lead to a morally beneficial state. Furthermore, he completely concedes the fact that the idea of national security justifies horrible atrocities. At that point, you look at the negative case that you can't harm innocents. Looking towards my opponent's contentions, once again, he's not answering the responses that I gave. On his first contention, where he argues that a state can use self-defense, I specifically argued, looking even up above at the framework, there are limits on what a state can do in the name of self-defense. You can't just harm innocents, especially those who haven't done anything wrong. If you look towards the second, and furthermore, he's completely conceding the fact that often it's not effective. In 98.5% of the cases, it kills innocents. Looking towards the second contention, he tries to make this deterrence argument, once again, that's empirically denied. So here are the key points in today's debate. The first place where you should negate is off the value and the value criterion debate. My opponent does not even touch on any of the responses I gave as to why his value and his value criterion are inherently flawed. That means you should negate. But even if you don't buy that, I'm showing you even on a non-absolute level, targeted killing results in numerous innocents dying, both short and long term. At that point, it's morally wrong. Even if you don't buy any of this, even if you look towards national security, a state in which you provoke terrorists into attacking you further does not uphold national security. So even if you don't buy any of my responses against this value criterion, if you look at national security, you can see national security is clearly not being upheld when we use targeted killing. At that point, it's morally impermissible, so you should negate.
Okay, during this break time, now I want to hear about, as we get closer to the judging session, tell me, what are the judges really looking for?
The judges are supposed to be looking for the most persuasive combination of presentation and logic. What that means is different for each judge. Some judges prefer very evidence-heavy cases. Others prefer many hypothetical illustrations of the particular philosophy that the debater is espousing. And in fact, at major tournaments, the judges will post what are called paradigm sheets, which outline exactly what they're looking for in a round.
Are there any techniques that a debater might use that might warrant additional points?
Well, certainly the strategy of establishing key voting issues or crystallizing the round at the end of the last rebuttal is something that every debater does, and that makes it very accessible for the judge who might be having trouble with the notes or might just be trying to decide who wins the round to really focus on what the debaters believe is important.
Okay. Looks like we're going to go back to the debate.
Okay, so this speech is just going to touch on a couple of the things that Ani pointed out as his key issues for the round, and then I'm going to offer my own. Judges ready? Okay, starting into my opponent's last speech. At the end of his speech, he touched on several things he thought were key. The first were the value and value criterion debate, that I didn't respond to the attacks he made. But again, I did. I'm saying that when we're looking in the context of the resolution, we have to look to societal welfare because of the two reasons that he never actually attacked. That A, the government has a primary obligation to its citizens, and that the government has a moral obligation to protect those citizens, so we have to look to that moral obligation, and it comes first in the round. This is coming off my first speech that he didn't respond to throughout the round. So, in that light, he says that it results in the death of numerous innocents. But first of all, again, he's using completely empirics, and I've offered my own empirics. Israel avoids innocent deaths in 70 to 75% of its targeted killings. But he still thinks that his are somehow more important than mine. What makes his statistics so good that they cancel out all the other the statistical analysis that I'm offering? No, we need to look to inherent problems with targeted killing, and that's the main issue with the negative that I pointed out. He doesn't speak to the nature of the tool, he speaks to specific abuses. So again, this is why his value criterion structure doesn't hold up, is because he doesn't draw the line where we should sacrifice the harm of innocents in other countries for our own societal welfare. And again, that attack is going to stand. So that resolves the value criterion debate, how we need to, when our government acts, look to protecting our own citizens first. And since the negative never puts a quota on how many innocents can be killed, we don't actually know where he's affirming or negating. Now, another point that I think is important that he tried to extend off of his case is that the necessary evil point. He's saying that even if something may be necessary, it's still not morally permissible. But at that point, when the negative is trying to make that argument, he's advocating for immorality. You have to notice that he is not allowed to use targeted killing ever. And the whole affirmative was built to say that we need to keep this open as a tool for our government to protect us. If you take away targeted killing, which is a unique and effective tool that protects us from one of the biggest threats in the world today, which is terrorism, you take the government's responsibility, you take the government's obligation to protect its citizens away, and you take away the tools it has to enforce that obligation. So again, my key voting issues for the round are basically that my contentions still stand. That my first contention, my opponent has never said that anyone would deny states the right to self-defense. He never says that we can't have states defend themselves. So insofar as my second contention is true, that targeted killing is unique, that no other military policy can quite do the same things targeted killing can do, and if we don't use targeted killing, we can't properly defend our nations, there we have to affirm the resolution. So again, as for my observation, which also went unattacked throughout the round, that's going to be another voting issue. That I'm not saying we use targeted killing whenever we can. I'm not saying that I have to advocate for abuses of the tool. I'm not saying that it should become a maxim of our government that we use at every opportunity, that it becomes the default setting for our foreign policy. I'm saying that we need to keep it on the table as an option, which the negative can't do, because otherwise we don't have it as a tool at all. Thus, I affirm. Good round.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we've been listening to the annual High School Debate Championship sponsored by Baker Hostetler. And I should say Hawkins School and University School should be very proud. We will return to the program and the judging in just a moment, but first, a few announcements. We welcome all of you here today and those listening to WCPM 90.3 FM, WCLV, WTAM, or one of the many radio stations across the country. Radio broadcasts of the City Club are made possible through the generous support of Case Western Reserve University. Our television broadcast partner is WVIZ, PBS IdeaStream, and Time Warner Cable. Television broadcasts are supported by PNC and Cleveland State University. We have live audio webcasts available through WCLV and Cleveland.com, and our live televised webcasts are supported by the University of Akron. Each year, the City Club High School Debate Championship is sponsored by the law firm of Baker Hostetler in memory of Patrick Jordan. This is not only a wonderful and lasting tribute to Pat Jordan, but also enables the City Club to invite high school debaters from throughout the region to attend, as well as classmates and families of the contestants. Our sincere thanks to Baker Hostetler for their ongoing generous support of this important program, and to John Parker, who represents the firm here today, along with his colleagues. John, please convey to your firm our great and sincere appreciation for all that Baker Hostetler does for this program and for the City Club. And a round of applause for Baker Hostetler. We are pleased to welcome students here as part of the City Club student program. With us today are students from a number of area schools, too numerous to mention. Participation of these students is made possible by a generous grant from the Fred E. Scholl Foundation, Bernard L. Carr, chairman. We're also pleased to welcome guests at tables hosted by Baker Hostetler and by Phi Beta Kappa. So thank you all for your support.
Again, on behalf of Baker and Hostetler, I want to thank you all for coming to today's debate and congratulate both the debaters on a tremendous job today. When those debates... I mentioned before when I was up here that there are debates at my house between me and my children, and in those debates there is always a clear winner and a clear loser. That's not true today. I think both debaters did such a tremendous job that while we do have a winner, we do not have a loser. I think they both should be very, very proud of the job they did and the accomplishments that they have. And in fact, it was a very close debate today and was decided on a 2-1 decision. And the winner of the 2012 High School Debate Championship from University School is Victor Mezacapa. And Ani, congratulations on a really good job. Thank you. Again, thank you very much for coming, and with that, the City Club is adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.